Yeah, so it's not like the big sell up front. You know, my first job title was data scientist. They want to call data managers data scientists these days, but really, that's a whole different raft of skills, isn't it?
Data science, I think of as an ML engineer tapping away at computers who sits in a dark room.
The role has changed, but actually, essentially, the industry hasn't. You know what I mean? So what we call things and what we do things, really, it's first principles. That really hasn't changed. There's just lots of different overlays. But if you understand it from the first principles, it doesn't change that much.
Cool. Hello, welcome, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. This is the Study Success Blueprint. Hello, my name is Matthew Mace. This is the Study Success Blueprint, and I have with me today Adam Walker, who is a subject matter expert around clinical trials. Adam, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Matthew, for having me today. Pleasure to be here.
What medical advancement is exciting you today?
I've just come back from a conference in Prague a couple of weeks ago, and what's really exciting me is the overlay of technology and artificial intelligence in really cleaning clinical trial data to a level that we've never done before in as quick a time as we've done before, through using smart technologies that are currently available in the public domain, but really putting them in the world of good clinical practice and using technology to its best.
I don't think you're losing your job anytime soon with artificial intelligence, but certain processes can be automated for sure. So what is your take on how we collaborate in clinical trials world?
Collaboration has always been really key. What I'm seeing these days is more engagement between academia, clinical research, and the people performing the roles through those vendor providers. There is far more collaboration than there ever has been. There is more information in the public domain, again, than there ever has been. And really, it's just putting smart boundaries around that and making sure that we're getting best data out the other side of all of these collaborations.
So clinical trials has really changed in the last decade, but also over the last 30 years. And I found this out a few weeks ago, chatting to a colleague of mine who works at the FDA. And I didn't appreciate the emergence of the CRO is a relatively new phenomenon. What's your take? Describe it to me. How has CRO grown at such a large scale over the last decade?
Well, historically, pharma companies used to do their own data collection, data analysis, and reporting. That really built an opportunity for CROs to come in, to sell their services, to fix the costs and the quality around those services. That then gave regulators and external viewers of the data more confidence. So over a period of time, CROs have become much smarter, much more integrated. They use a handful of platforms. The data is quality in, quality out. And from a pharma company, they can fix their prices around the cost, around the effort. And they know if they're holding a CRO accountable, what they're going to get and when they're going to get it. And if they don't, there's obviously penalties for that. So it works from both sides. So whilst that has provided quality and consistency of outcome for pharma, it's also provided a huge amount of work and consistent, continual, repetitive business for CROs. If they're doing good work for a pharma or a sponsor, they tend to get a lot more repeat business as a result of that.
It's so ingrained. CROs are so ingrained in the process of running clinical trials. Why do you think that is? Obviously, we talked about data quality. We talked about fixed costs. Are there any other, maybe pitch to me,
Why use a CRO?
why use a CRO?
Yeah. So if you're a sponsor and you come to me, I can say to you, well, soup to nuts, you give me a protocol and I'll give you a clinical study report in 6-9 months, depending on what phase we're working on. If it's an early phase clinical trial, you give me the drug, you give me the protocol, and we can run this in an early phase clinical trial setting, and you will have empirical data that you can provide to a regulator in 9 months' time, and it will cost you X.
Mhm.
That's your big sell. And all you need to do is pay the dollar cost at those regular invoicing intervals, and ultimately, I think you will get quality at the output.
Do you think the modern CRO is better or worse than its ideal? You know, are they still adding value in that same way?
I believe they are, but I will caveat that by saying it depends on the size of the pharma or sponsor versus the size of the CRO, because you need a good match. In other words, if you're a small startup company with one or two drugs, you don't really want to be going to the big players because you're just going to get lost. You need a company that's going to give you that level of confidence that you're dealing with the same human beings all the way through that process, and you're
Mhm,
building up relationships, rapport, communication styles, and collaboration around that. That's really, really key. So if I'm a startup company, that's what I'm looking for in my CROs.
mhm.
Similarly, if I'm looking at a global phase 3B, I'm going to be going to the likes of IQVIA, Syneos, LabCorp, because those are the only kind of companies that have the global footprint that can actually support me in patient recruitment, data collection, in all the levels of analysis and consistency across those different global settings. There's no way that a small CRO can cover that without outsourcing it themselves. And there's no point in that.
I think we discussed when we first met up a few months back. I was stupid enough to run a clinical study on my own, and it was a learning experience. Do I wish I had gone to a CRO? Absolutely. Can I pinpoint the tangible value? Well, yes, I wouldn't have probably had a mental health breakdown, but they need to sell themselves. I think they have a bad rap these days.
Yeah, I think they do. And that's where opportunities arise for people like me that are well connected within this industry, where I can effectively provide that umbrella company through my network of consultants to a small biotech or pharma company that's got that one drug through the experiences that I've gained across my career, but also give confidence that they're dealing with human beings and not a number, a name, a brand.
So could you just walk me through how have you got here? How have you got to the point actually you have a very successful brand yourself in terms of you're well connected, you know the CRO space, you know data, you know case report forms, you know you've been around clinical trials for a very long time. How do you get here and how does somebody else get here?
Only earlier today, I was talking to one of my mentees from the University of Greenwich on a very similar topic. And, he's at the beginning of his career. He's trying to get the qualifications that are going to open doors to this industry. It's quite a difficult industry to get into, but I will say it's a small industry once you're in it. So to go into organizations and just learn from the ground up, be open to opportunity, try things, take risks. Not everyone's going to do that. And in this industry, you can have a very straight path if you want it. You can get a job with IQVIA and you can stay there for 30 years. Or you can do what I've done, which is jump around, bounce around, you know, different locations, different geographies, get on a plane every week, learn how it's done in Denmark, in Germany, in France, in the US. You can be that person if you want to be that person. And that's what served me in my career, has just been learning from the ground up from first principles, but then building on those first principles.
Cardiologist friend of mine said it was like the scientific method we learn in school is the same scientific method used today. And
Yeah.
and is that the first principles you're really talking about?
Yes. Yeah. It's dealing with objective information. It's A to B to C to D, but also around that scientific methodologies that we learn at school and that we apply in our higher education. It's then challenging the status quo when you're in a clinical trial setting, when you're in a cardiological setting. I've worked on QT studies extensively in early phase. Oh my goodness, what a lot of data, tens of thousands of data points, triplicate ECGs. I've been in the trenches with that and it was painful. And I'm not saying I don't want to do it again, but believe me, when you've worked in that area, you learn very quickly what works and what doesn't work in that setting, because otherwise you're going to live all manner of pain when it comes to the data.
Mhm. And the data brings us up. What was your first job? We say
So
job or role these days. Like people say, "What's your first role?" And it's like it's really a job when you're 20.
my first my first job my first job was picking bananas on kibbutz in Israel with my wife once we graduated. But then my first role, I would say, where I applied my scientific knowledge was with Quintiles, as a data manager, a clinical data manager in a place called Battle in Sussex in the UK. And that was where I learned the very basics of clinical trial methodologies, good clinical practice, and was taught the tools that would set me up for the rest of my career, actually.
What's something that you learn in that first role that is still sticks with you today?
One of the first things I think I ever learned was the importance of signing off against every data point. And when I say that, we used to raise queries manually, and there were validation guidelines in those days. But when we made changes to the database, we also had to physically make changes to the paper CRF. And that involved initialing and dating every change based upon the query resolution, the query that we were raising and the query that we were resolving. That stayed with me today because that is effectively the basis of your audit trail.
Mhm.
That was old school audit trail, which is now obviously 21 CFR Part 11 compliant. And we have technology and platforms that run all the way through the systems from the first point of entry from a patient signing off the informed consent all the way through to the final principal investigator signing off the CRF at the end saying, yes, this is absolutely exactly what we collected during this clinical trial based upon the protocol that we see in front of us. So that has never changed. In 30 years, that's never changed. And I think that's unlikely that that will ever change. The principle of it.
Yeah, the principle of data integrity is key for any clinical trial and for any patient. I'm very patient centric. Obviously, we do clinical trials not for the making of the profit for insert company here, but it's for the patient. We have to be very sure every individual step along the way is completely tracked back, and we know everything can be validated, can be verified. How do you think AI impacts how CROs work moving forward and dealing with that data?
Well, last week I saw this demo, as I indicated, of an AI tool that would raise and resolve queries based upon those validation guidelines back to the original methods. And the human intervention piece of that is that you can bucket these activities together, but ultimately you have to have a human pair of eyes that agree not only with the error that's been identified based on the validation guidelines, but actually that the query makes sense. And that if I were a human being writing it like I did 30 years ago, that I would still write it today in the same way, or that the logic makes sense based upon the gaps in the protocol, or indeed high-low ranges, missing fields, anything that's non-compliant within that data collection tool.
If I am a startup and I'm trying to look at data very specifically, I'm trying to build an AI company that is thinking about clinical trials data, where's the bar for acceptability? What I mean is that we ideally want to have no unresolved data queries. We want to capture all inconsistent data. That is not possible. We strive for it, but there's always going to be something that falls through human error.
Yep.
Where does AI need to sit? Does it need to be equal on par to the human error? Does it need to be better with zero flaws? Or is there a middle ground? What's the metric that you're looking for going, okay, I believe this because it resolves 96% queries or less or higher or lower?
Yeah. In clinical trial methodologies, what we tend to talk about is error rates. I think what you were referring to was almost around risk-based monitoring effectively, isn't it?
Yeah.
You kind of made reference to that. So there is a layer of risk-based monitoring, which takes away some of the human intervention from the monitoring activities. And then it comes to my teams, the data guys, and we will always apply an error rate around what is acceptable. And that can be different from early phase through to late phase. Perfect is the enemy of the good. So, we're going for 95% plus. definitely. And I think in reality, what I'm seeing is that these tools can do a very, very good job for the likes of the human beings like me.
Mhm,
As I mentioned, there will always be a role for a human intervention because you just have to have that extra pair of eyes. I
mhm,
think they have to have a level of competence and capability that is around human intervention. So that will always be defined in, what we would call the data management plan, but, feeding it back to the clinical trial protocol, you want it to be as close to the best it can possibly be, as close to 100%. But, we're talking about perfect, and perfect is a very, very high bar to meet. And in real terms, I'm no statistician, but most of my statisticians friends would say, well, if we're within an error rate of acceptability, we'll sign off and we'll lock that database, and that's good enough for us.
mhm, mhm.
That will then take us through to the next phase.
Do you think the statistician and all of us really becomes slightly uncomfortable when thinking about a future of there may be no human in the loop of that monitoring process? That's how most startups approach this. They go, we're going to completely eliminate all human beings.
The moonshot.
Exactly. How can a statistician sign off on something that there is there risk of bias over time, especially if these are less regulated, not unregulated, but they're less regulated software tools. It's just based upon your experience with that. Are there any undue risks with integrating AI in our data monitoring plan?
So one of my very good friends is an epidemiologist and a statistician of very high regard. He's a professor of epidemiology. And I know with him sat on my shoulder, he would say the risks, the benefits is what we talk about, right? In clinical trials. Is it worth the risk to take the human out of the loop than it is to include a human in the loop
Mhm.
for the benefit that that would give us? So we always talk about risk benefit in all clinical trials, in all of these aspects. So I don't think there's any point in taking the human out of the loop. I don't think that is an ideal that we want to get to. So that might be a generation away from us. It could be much quicker. The way AI is moving and the pace it's moving over the last year, 18 months has been rapid and fast moving, and it's changing everyone's capabilities in the palm of their hands. But I think ultimately we're dealing with risk benefit here, and humans and patients. And at the heart of a clinical trial, patients are at the heart of everything we do, right?
Yeah.
Patient safety.
So balancing all of those risks, patient safety, we talk about artificial intelligence and how it could streamline certain processes. So let's say you can streamline repetitive processes
Yeah.
with the possibility that there could be software that helps to just move us on a little bit faster. How does the role in a data team or even in a CRO or a sponsor, how does that change in response to new technologies?
It definitely reduces the requirement for human intervention. So there's less people that you need. But actually, in my mind, I think the fewer people you have, the better qualifications they will need, the better experience they will need. There's always a role for an expert or someone who's seen it in many different guises, in different platforms, in different therapeutic areas, in different geographies, under different cultural alignment. So I think experts will always be required, but from a mentor's point of view, what I'm going to tell my students and my mentees is get as much experience as you can as quickly as you can before you're out the loop.
Mhm, mhm.
That's the key. So, what we should be teaching our students in universities right now and our masters and PhDs is get that experience as quickly as you can, get into the workplace, try and get those opportunities wherever you can and whenever you can as quickly as possible.
If I read that back, when we were surrounded around these tools and I'm a CRO or I'm a sponsor, historically a CRO or a sponsor, whoever is existing on the basis of that we need an army of CRAs and CTAs and any other acronym that you can think about when it comes to, and we're sort of eliminating some of the repetitive lower level roles which actually have a really significant cost on a clinical study, right?
That's correct.
Doing in hospital monitoring, even with a 25% SDV, is still a significant cost. And if we can automate that with digital tools, that's going to save a lot of cost. But on the back end, if I understand correctly, we now need a individual who has domain expertise, knowledge to understand, rapidly interpret a pattern to understand when the systems are failing.
Yeah, that's right. But also, I think aligning with that, you need very strong regulatory and documented approaches to those assumptions being made. So I'm not saying you can't have junior members doing much of what we would automate as much as possible, but the documentation around that has to also sit alongside what we're asking people to do very closely as well. You know, there is a component around standard operating procedures, documentation, and visibility of assumptions being made, not just through the large language models and the AI tools, but again through that peer review of those large language models and the outcomes of that.
Yeah. Just playing with it a little bit. If I think about your mentees and we fast forward 5 years and let's say 80% of clinical trials monitoring is automated, do you think the mentee gets the experience from reading the logical reports of how decisions were made and then becomes familiar with how the decisions were made? So everything has to have an audit trail. We can't do a clinical trial and AI writes up a query and there's no audit and we can't see what query it made. We can't see who signed off on the data correction. Do you think actually whilst I'm getting experience is reading an audit report or an audit log of what happened and how is it remediated, and when things needed intervention from a human, when things didn't need an intervention? Could that be the future of how people get knowledge? Or do you think there is just going to be more trials performed because of AI allows the phase 3B to sail through, and then a new startup company you're gonna cut your teeth in a startup organization who is gonna do an old school trial with humans?
There's a big question there. And you've reminded me of a conversation that happened a few weeks ago with regulators from the EMA when that question was posed around how much of this can we allow to go under the AI umbrella and what standards currently exist. And the answer that they came back with was, doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter how you do it, as long as you document it and you can show us and give us confidence that that audit trail exists and that we can see what decisions were made and there's a story around that, then you're good. There's no expectation around pass, fail versus AI. It's not, we're not going to let this through. It's show us what you've done,
Mhm.
show us how you've done it, and show us the documentary proof. So I took that as a real positive away from those regulators because they were so transparent around it. And actually, I think in the room, the sense was that the bar was set too low. But actually, they said, you know, their response was, well, you tell us where their bar is. Let's have the conversation around it, document it. And I took that as an enormous positive because I went into that conference and around many of those seminars thinking, maybe we're wishing too hard here. Maybe this can't be the case. But actually, they were very, very positive around what was possible. They
Yeah.
didn't say no.
I think that's a really good point, and it reminds me of something else. Majority of the time I interact with the FDA, and I think the EMA have the same sort of pragmatic approach, which is CROs, sponsors, medical companies, physicians, I think vilify regulators because they see them as impeding progress. But when you speak to them, actually, they're very sensible, pragmatic scientists who understand data and understand risk benefit. It all comes back to risk benefit. And It sounds like the EMA are willing to adopt new technology. I know definitely the FDA are really interested in accepting new technology and welcoming it. One example from my world is win ratios in clinical trial endpoints. Now, we could argue, and it's probably a different podcast to talk about the benefits of win ratios and are they actually reflective of the overall outcome of the trial. But regulators have been very happy to accept them, understand after a couple of years, okay, if it passed a win ratio here and then we monitor it for 5 years, did we actually see the benefit that we should have seen? That sounds really pragmatic. I don't feel like we should be vilifying them, especially when they come to the table and say, "Hey, we want your AI tools, we want your AI medical devices, we want your AI drug discovery,
Yeah.
we want your AI clinical trials, but just show us the data."
It makes perfect sense to me, the responses that we got. And I go into companies and I audit companies as well. So I wanted to hear that as much as it reassured me that if I am going into other companies and asking similar sorts of questions, that before those regulations even exist and there is a level of expectation, we know what we're kind of going into. The principles are clear. Show me, tell me, give me confidence.
Mhm,
That's all you want as an auditor, right? When you go into a company, there's there's clear delineation of responsibility, there's visibility of actionable outcomes. And that was what they reinforced to us in that conference setting. And I took so many positives from the transparency of the responses.
mhm.
There was no smoke and mirrors. It was freely available and willingly discussed. Wasn't a we don't talk about this because we haven't got regulations around it. It's currently under discussion, and these are the principles that we will be working towards. So if you're working with organizations, with sponsors, bear that in mind, go in there, and we're all good.
It always comes back to that core scientific method. I don't think clinical trials have changed since the early 1900s. We did something, we observed it, we documented it, we then published it, told people, and then n- regulators, governments, people, individuals decided whether they believed the evidence or not. I don't think anything's changed.
No, in principle, it hasn't. You're right. But actually, we still need to remind ourselves of exactly that, that we are doing best practice, and the best practice today is improved upon from yesterday and yesteryear.
Mhm,
And that's clear as we head forward into the next generation and the next generation of life scientists who are working in clinical research, that they take these principles forward with them with better tools, better awareness, and everything that sits around those
mhm.
activities that they're performing.
Are you overall positive or negative about the direction we're going in how clinical trials are being performed? Are they being performed as efficaciously as they could be? Are we moving backwards or are we moving forward?
My approach is always there is an opportunity. Wherever there is an opportunity, I will always see the positive in that. I cannot see that how looking in the rearview mirror and where we've come from in a very short space of time tells me that the future is looking bright and the future is looking full of opportunity. I think those that will succeed, the companies that will succeed, and the medications that will succeed will be those that are pushing the bar and continue to push the bar with regards to opportunity cost, risk benefit. All of that will drive change and improvement in this industry for sure.
Yeah.
Because historically, that's what we see in the review. And I think if we take those principles forward, how else can we see it?
Yeah. And I'll have this one last question on that theme. So time to patient, time of trial is important.
Yeah.
That's one metric. Are there other success metrics that you see coming out of from a data perspective or from an endpoints perspective or a resource allocation perspective that you would prioritize when advising someone to design a trial?
Yeah. I mean, when I was preparing for this conversation, I was thinking around patient recruitment as well. And, first patient in is obviously a key metric, but last patient out to database lock to final TFLs and clinical study report, those are key metrics that will always be key. Patient recruitment is central to successful clinical trials. And all of the tools that we've referred to have a component that can impact directly patient recruitment. So the better your tools are for identifying those patient populations and getting to the nub of your core cohorts is going to be key to the successful outcomes thereafter. So I think there are many other components to this, but funneling in patients is going to be key into driving that positive outcome. And I think all of these parts play into that.
I really appreciate you coming down and chatting to me. I should probably steal some of your positivity at some point. Thank you, Adam. We'll leave it there, and we'll probably speak again soon.
Thank you so much, Matthew.
Cool. I would like to thank Adam Walker for joining me today. If you like this podcast and you want to listen to more, please like and subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Join me in some upcoming episodes where we discuss with Michael Young from Lindus Health about reimagining clinical trials and the CRO space, as well as some international trialists from the United States. So with that, I can leave you today. Speak to you very soon. I've been Matthew Mace, and this is the Study Success Blueprint.
Wow. And you landed heavily and smacked your head.
Yeah, I did lose consciousness. That was.
Okay. Did you have a helmet on?
Yeah, helmet, glasses, saved my life. Definitely.
Hospitalized?
No. What? Funny story. Hit a pothole, smashed the carbon bike, and someone called the police. Got sewn up, jumped on the train, saw West Brom beat Crystal Palace.
Always a good thing. Beating Crystal Palace as a seagull.
Exactly.